Cycle highways are more popular than ever. In countries like the Netherlands, Belgium and Germany, the last few years have seen a massive increase in new cycle highway projects. At the same time, there have also been cases where the branding of a cycle highway was removed again, like in London in 2018. In one of my previous videos, we already talked about how a cycle highway should be built. But we completely skipped one crucial question. Beyond minimum widths and maximum gradients, the most important issue is this. Do cycle highways even make sense? To answer that, we'll look at the costs and travel speed, take a look at similarities to real highways, and take a deep dive in the traffic planning ideas behind them. Welcome to Mobility Minded. To determine whether cycle highways make sense compared to regular cycling paths, we first have to clarify what actually distinguishes the two. That conventional cycling infrastructure is useful in most cases should be a common fact. But here, we're dealing with a special case: cycle highways. So, what exactly makes them special? First of all, the distinction is not always that easy. Some cycle highways are little more than rebranded streets, while some regular cycling paths are already well separated from car traffic. On some cycle highways, you may encounter a traffic light after just a few hundred meters, while elsewhere you can ride uninterrupted for kilometers on an ordinary cycle path out in the countryside. So the difference is not always defined purely by design quality. Sometimes it's simply a matter of branding. From time to time, it's just this little sign that tells you that you're currently experiencing the most advanced cycling infrastructure available. That said, there are established design standards that are intended to define a cycle highway, and these are generally stricter than those for regular cycling paths. This leads us to the next challenge. Standards vary between countries. What would be considered a prime example of a cycle highway in Germany might only qualify as a neighborhood cycle path in the Netherlands. Despite these differences, however, there are a few core principles that are consistent internationally. I've already discussed these in more detail in my video How Not to Design Cycle Highways, which I will link at the end. In short, a cycle highway is meant to be a high-quality cycling connection for medium distances, typically between 5 and 20 kilometers. It should be as safe, comfortable, and uninterrupted as possible. This is achieved through factors such as high pavement quality, low gradients, a minimal number of intersections, and cyclist priority at those intersections that cannot be avoided. A minimum width is also required. All of this is intended to create a riding experience comparable to that of driving on a highway. A cyclist enters the cycle highway at an intersection, yields to cyclists already on the route, accelerates to cruising speed, and can then ride uninterrupted for most of the journey. Crossing traffic either has to give way or is grade separated. Clear signage and consistent routing minimize the risk of getting lost. As a result, cyclists can reach their destination relatively quickly, safely, and predictably, much like a car driver using a motorway. By the way, maximizing the top speed of cyclists is not the goal of cycle highways. This is a common misconception and was actually one of the reasons why London decided to abandon the cycle superhighway branding. It also highlights a crucial difference between cycle highways and motorways. Cycle highways are not about excessive speed. They are about maintaining a reasonable and consistent speed for the majority of the journey. This is one of the biggest advantages cycle highways offer: a higher average speed. And this is not achieved by encouraging cyclists to ride faster, but by providing continuous right-of-way and minimizing interruptions. However, this is only one of several advantages cycle highways come with. But before we continue, a short disclaimer. We all know that cycling infrastructure in general brings many benefits, such as improved safety, reduced emissions, and better public health. In this video, however, I want to focus exclusively on those advantages that cycle highways offer beyond what a regular cycling path provides. With that clarified, let's get started. As already mentioned, the most important advantage of cycle highways is the higher average speed. This is achieved through mostly continuous right-of-way and cyclist priority at intersections. On regular cycling paths, cyclists often have to stop at crossings, wait for turning traffic, or even rely on pedestrian traffic lights to cross safely. On a well-designed cycle highway, these interruptions are largely eliminated, allowing cyclists to ride straight through most intersections without stopping. Another important benefit of cycle highways lies in wayfinding. Many of you will be familiar with this situation. When cycling in an unfamiliar area, you often have to check your phone to see whether you're still on the right route. And if you don't have a phone mount on your handlebars, this usually means stopping, taking off your gloves, depending on the season, and trying to memorize the route before continuing. An alternative is to rely on audio navigation, but this doesn't always work reliably and can easily lead to unnecessary detours or delays. Now, imagine a route that is marked like no other, clearly guiding you over long distances and directly leading you to your destination. Well, that is exactly what a cycle highway is meant to provide. While good signage should also be standard on regular cycling paths, wayfinding on cycle highways works extra smoothly. Because of their priority within the cycling network, the route you need to take is usually obvious. And if there's any doubt, the distinctive markings, such as the green edge lines, guide you along the way. On a cycle highway like this, getting lost becomes nearly impossible. Staying with these green road markings for a moment, they also serve another important purpose: signaling. Signaling in this context means that people encounter these markings, the signage, and ideally many cyclists using the route. This visibility signals that cycling is a viable and serious alternative for everyday mobility. It signals that using micromobility doesn't mean being pushed onto a narrow strip of paint next to a 6-lane road. It signals that the city values the most vulnerable road users and treats them not as an afterthought, but as a key part of its mobility strategy. This, in turn, sends an important message about the future. If people see that cycling infrastructure is being improved consistently and reliably, decisions such as owning fewer cars or replacing a car with a cargo bike become much easier. People can rely on the infrastructure rather than hoping it will improve someday. But the final and arguably most important advantage I want to mention in this video is the excellent cost-benefit ratio of cycle highways. This ratio is typically determined using a standard method in infrastructure planning known as a benefit cost analysis, often abbreviated as BCA or CBA. In simple terms, this analysis divides the benefits of a project by its costs. Governments use this method for nearly all infrastructure projects, whether it's a motorway, a railway line, a shipping canal, or a cycle highway, to determine whether an investment is worth it. While costs can usually be calculated directly in monetary terms, benefits are more complex. They are therefore converted into monetary value using standardized assumptions. One example would be travel time savings. Imagine a new, more direct route that reduces travel time from 10 minutes to 5 minutes. If 1,000 people use this route each day, that results in 5,000 minutes, or roughly 83 hours, saved per day. Transport planners then multiply this value by the so-called value of time. If we assume this to be 7 euros per hour, the daily benefit amounts to 581 euros. Over a service life of 30 years, this alone adds up to more than 6 million euros in benefits, which we can add to the equation. Other benefits are calculated in a similar way, such as reduced medical costs due to improved safety, lower greenhouse gas emissions, or many more. On the cost side, factors such as land acquisition, construction, and ongoing costs, like electricity bills for the streetlights, are considered. When all benefits are divided by all costs, the resulting value indicates whether a project is worthwhile. A value greater than 1 means that benefits exceed costs, while a value below 1 basically means don't do it. So, what does this have to do with cycle highways? Quite simply, the resulting value reflects how beneficial a project is for society as a whole. And this is where cycle highways clearly outperform regular cycling paths. While standard cycling projects often achieve benefit-cost ratios between 1 and 2, cycle highways regularly score significantly higher. For example, the first cycle highway in Germany, partially opened in 2015, achieved a benefit-cost ratio of 4.8. This is a remarkably strong result, and in my opinion, the most compelling argument in favor of building more cycle highways. Now, one could argue that the high BCA value doesn't stem from the fact that this is a cycle highway, but simply from the fact that this is a very well designed cycling path. In that sense, the branding as a cycle highway might not really contribute to its high score at all. This is an important thought, and it leads to a crucial question. Why bother building cycle highways in the first place if we could simply improve regular cycling paths? After all, the main selling points of cycle highways, high quality, safety, and good traffic flow, could theoretically also be achieved without calling them cycle highways. But this is where another core principle of transportation planning becomes relevant: road hierarchy. You see, not all streets serve the same purpose. Some are quiet neighborhood access roads, while others are major thoroughfares. A residential street can be a great place to live next to, but it performs poorly when it comes to moving large volumes of traffic quickly. On a main road, the situation is reversed. That is why, when you want to travel from point A to point B by car, you usually don't spend your entire trip navigating through neighborhood streets. Instead, you try to reach the main roads as quickly as possible and stay on them for as long as possible. Because these main roads are specifically designed to handle large traffic volumes efficiently. They often have priority over side streets and, in some cases, even great separation through bridges or tunnels. And this is probably where you already see where this is going. This kind of road hierarchy is still largely missing in cycling networks today. In my opinion, that is a missed opportunity. By identifying and prioritizing main cycling corridors, we can improve a large share of the distance traveled by many trips simply by upgrading a small number of key routes. Improving just one strategically important corridor can benefit thousands of cyclists whose trips run parallel to it. And this is exactly where I see the major advantage of cycle highways, and why simply upgrading regular cycling paths is not the same thing. Cycle highways serve a different use case and play a more important role within the cycling network than classic cycling paths. Because of that, it becomes especially important to guarantee a consistently high, if not higher, quality along these routes. This also explains why dedicated branding matters. A clearly recognizable cycle highway can be easily identified as a main cycling corridor, much like a motorway in the road network. The branding helps users understand the hierarchy of the network and makes it clear which routes are designed for longer, faster, and more direct trips. So, at this point, all of this might sound a little good to be true, doesn't it? And yeah, I have to admit, cycle highways do have their downsides. But I won't talk about how expensive a cycle highway can become, or the fact that if it is built as part of a greenfield development, it can also harm the environment to a certain extent. All of these disadvantages are already taken into account in the benefit-cost analysis. And if that score is higher than 1, they are, at least from a planning perspective, considered acceptable. However, there's one disadvantage, or rather, let's call it risk, that deserves special attention. This risk appears when cycle highways are built the wrong way. After all these compelling arguments in favor of cycle highways, there's one important truth that also needs to be acknowledged. Cycle highways are not the solution.
But that's not what you said earlier. Are you lying to us?
Okay. Let me be more precise. Cycle highways alone are not the solution. A neighborhood access street may be terrible at moving large volumes of fast traffic, but we still need it to actually reach our homes. If the entire road network consisted only of highways, it would completely fail. You might get to the next city very quickly, but you would never be able to reach your final destination. And the same principle applies to cycling infrastructure. We need cycle highways, but we also need smaller, regular cycling paths. What we really need is a coherent network, not just a few isolated high-quality routes. This is where the real risk lies. Governments often like to build shiny, prestigious projects. But in the process, they neglect the less glamorous, yet equally important smaller ones. And that would be truly unfortunate. Because if you only build isolated stretches of cycle highway for prestige reasons, while ignoring the rest of the cycling network, you may end up with something like this. Infrastructure that is poorly thought through, doesn't really help anyone, and ultimately discourages further investment in cycling altogether. But if cycle highways are done right, if they are understood as an addition to a broader network and are built in a way that improves mobility both within and between cities, then they become a powerful tool. In that case, cycle highways can meaningfully support micromobility, encourage people to change how they get around, and yes, they absolutely do make sense.